Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. It's great to be back with you here on another Friday for this segment of Morning Musings. And I want to remind you of an offer that I made in my last video, all right? I've written a book that covers almost every bit, and perhaps even more, of the territory I've been sharing with you in this series on the challenge of Christ. The challenge of Christ, quite simply, is Jesus said, John chapter 10, 37 and following. Pardon me, and it's necessary, of course, to kind of go back over this territory by way of rehearsal. You know, it may very well be that you're a new viewer to this program, and you're kind of jumping in the middle and what have you. I would recommend highly that you go back at where we began this series. And I've been talking about how the challenge of Christ is. Jesus said, "Do not believe me for my word's sake. Believe me for my works. If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." Hey, look, we find this principle at work in Jesus' own family. Did you realize that? In John chapter 7, we find the time for one of the feast days had arrived. And Jesus went on up to Jerusalem, did not go up to Jerusalem at the time that everyone thought he should. Well, his own brothers came to him and said, "Aren't you going up to Jerusalem?" And he said, "My time is not yet come." Now, his brothers, we are told in John chapter 7, did not yet believe in him. They did not believe in him until after he was resurrected. Do you see the power of that? This is John chapter 10, 37 and following. Being played out for us right there in John chapter 7. Repeatedly, Jesus told his apostles, his family, the Jews, that he was going to go to Jerusalem. He would be betrayed, he would be crucified, he would be buried, but on the third day he would be raised from the dead. Hey, look, his brothers thought he was crazy, evidently. After all, let's look at it in a rather prosaic way. I had two brothers. One of them's already passed away. And if either one of my brothers came to me and said, "Hey, Don, I'm going to go to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I'm going to be killed, but on the third day, don't worry about it, I'm going to be raised from the dead," I was like, yeah, right, sure. It was perfectly natural for his brothers not to believe in him. It was stunning. As I've shared with you in an earlier video, some years ago in Dallas, Texas, just south of me, a man got on the tarmac, threw himself into a jet engine, and was chopped into mincemeat. They found a note on the seat of his car that said, "In 3 days I'll rise again." Well, look, that was 40 or 50 years ago. He hasn't risen again. And so Jesus' comments, Jesus' predictions were absolutely stunning. They were challenging. But his words come down to us today. If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me. Now look, there are all sorts of stages in our faith in Jesus, okay? We are told at different junctures in Jesus' ministry that as a result of seeing some of his miracles, the crowds came to believe in him. Well, the question is, was that a fully orbed, fully developed, mature faith? Well, I would suggest to you that it was not, because after all, even though we have those statements that many came to believe in him, yet in John chapter 6, Jesus told his audience, "Except a man eat my flesh and drink my blood, he cannot enter the kingdom." And from that point forward, many of those people abandoned him and followed him no more. Wait a minute. Some of these very people had come to believe in him. But you see, their faith was not full. It was not fully grounded. The foundation was not yet full. And so when Jesus challenges you and me, do not believe me for my word's sake, believe me for my work's sake. I would suggest to you that the fully orbed faith, the fully developed faith, comes only after we are able to look back on the entire panoramic view and the entire narrative of Jesus' ministry and his prophecies. And to say, well, he did this, I believe. He did that, I believe. He did this, I believe. And as the consummation, the perfection, the maturity of his works was to be his coming in his kingdom and power and great glory. Let me illustrate. In Mark chapter 9, Jesus was speaking to a great multitude. And he said, "Verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the coming of the Son of Man." Well, unfortunately, that's not the greatest of translations. The Greek of the text conveys this meaning. There are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see that the Son of Man had come in power and great glory. In other words, folks, listen to me very carefully, okay? And look, I fully understand how shocking this can be, but it's text. It's Bible. I understand how challenging it could be because, believe me, I was raised as a fifth-generation amillennialist, believing that Jesus is coming in the kingdom in power and great glory was at the so-called end of time. But the question is, do we have any 2,000-year-old people running around who are going to witness Jesus is coming in the kingdom in power and great glory? And by the way, that couldn't be Pentecost. The coming of the kingdom in power and great glory is the coming of the kingdom in judgment. We'll discuss that later. All right? But you absolutely must catch the power of what Jesus said in Mark chapter 9, verse 1. There are some standing here which will not taste of death. In other words, they will live until the time of his coming in the kingdom in power and great glory. They would live through that event. They would look back on that event as an accomplished reality. Wow. That is absolutely stunning. I know it challenged my upbringing, it challenged my tradition, and it certainly challenges the, quote, historical view of the church, unquote, but it's right there in the text. And it's got to be confronted. This is the challenge of Christ. Now remember, as I've been sharing with you in this series, the atheists, the Muslims, the Jews, they all point to prophecies like that, and they tell us, look, we all know Jesus did not come in the lifetime of the first century people in power and great glory. You know, laying right over here on my desk is a book entitled New Testament Theology by Rudolf Bultmann. Rudolf Bultmann is still considered to be an incredible theologian. Here's what you need to know about Rudolf Bultmann. He began his seminary training as a firm believer in Jesus as the Son of God. He believed in the inspiration of Scripture. But as he went through his theological training, as he went through his Greek training, he began to see those passages like Mark chapter 9, verse 1. He had the same literalistic view of the coming of the Lord on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory that I was raised with, that you were almost undoubtedly raised with. He knew what the Greek said. All right? One of the greatest Greek scholars of the last generation. There was no escaping the language of time. But because of his literalistic view of the coming of the Lord on the clouds of heaven, in the glory of the Father, etc., in power and great glory, he said, right there in that book, New Testament Theology, or Theology of the New Testament, and also in his book, Primitive Christianity, in that book, Rudolf Bultmann said, every schoolboy knows that Jesus predicted his coming at the end of human history for his generation. Every schoolboy likewise knows it did not happen. Therefore, Jesus' words failed. Listen to me, folks. This is the challenge of Christ. How do you deal? How do you answer the challenge of Christ? Well, as I've been pointing out, Jesus promised not to come as a physical 5'5" Jewish man descending out of heaven. He promised to come, Matthew 16, 27 and 28. The Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and shall reward every man according as his work shall be. And verily I say unto you. Now, I've shared with you ever so briefly, that little term in the Greek is amen, lego, humin. Verily I say unto you. And as many scholars have noted, the force of this statement is this. Jesus used this term about 95 times in the New Testament. And every time that statement, verily I say unto you, is used, it calls attention to what is about to be said that will emphasize something that has already been said or emphasize a subject under consideration. You know what that means? It means that Matthew 16:28 is emphasizing, driving home the point of verse 27. So let's look again at those two verses. Now, here momentarily, we're going to be looking again. You know, last couple of weeks I've spent sharing with you from Isaiah 34. And the prediction of the coming of the Lord, the day of the Lord, the great day of the Lord's vengeance against Edom, and how God came. The creation was destroyed, but it couldn't have been literally, physically fulfilled. I've been pointing out to you, this is the use of Hebraic apocalyptic language. It is metaphoric, it is figurative language, never intended to be taken literally. So here is Jesus saying in Matthew 16, 27 and 28, the Son of Man, that's him, will come in the glory of the Father. In other words, he's going to come like the Father has come. How did Jesus come how did the Father come in the destruction of Edom? Well, he used the Babylonians. Yeah, he used the Babylonians. I proved that to you from the Bible encyclopedias. I proved that to you from the book of Malachi, how Here was Isaiah 34 predicting the time of the destruction of Edom when the jackals would make their dwelling there. And Malachi chapter 1 says, I have destroyed Edom and the jackals are making their habitation there. Prophecy fulfilled. And yet material creation was not destroyed. More on that here in just a few moments. God didn't literally, visibly, bodily come out of heaven, but he fulfilled the prophecy of the great day of God's vengeance by utilizing the Babylonians to destroy the Edomites, the Idumeans. Okay, Jesus said, that's how I'm going to come. I'm going to ascend to the right hand of the Father on high. I'm going to be enthroned as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and I'm going to act in sovereign judgment the way my Father did. Because after all, Jesus said in John 5:21 and following, from henceforth, from now on, the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all men might honor the Son as they honor the Father. The Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. Well, let me ask you a question. Ask yourself the question. How had Jesus seen the Father come in judgment? Well, he had seen him riding on the clouds of heaven into Egypt, Isaiah chapter 19. Oh, but wait, it was by means of the Assyrians under the leadership of Sargon, Isaiah chapter 20, who destroyed Egypt. He had destroyed the Assyrians riding on the clouds, coming on the flames, coming with the flames of fire, coming with a shout, when his angel went through the camp of the Assyrians and killed 186,000 soldiers. Are you beginning to get the point here? So, as I mentioned a moment ago, I wrote this book to develop this entire concept of what it meant for Jesus to come in the glory of the Father. Now then, let's tie this together as I started to a moment ago. Okay, number one, Jesus said he was going to come in the glory of the Father, which means he was going to come as he had seen the Father come. Number two, he said, verily I say unto you, there are some standing here, that was some standing there 2,000 years ago, shall not taste of death. They won't die until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom with power and great glory. That's conflating Matthew 16, 27, 28 with Mark chapter 9 and verse 1. Okay? Now, as I mentioned to you last week, and as I mentioned a moment ago, I've written this book, Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory, in which I chronicle over and over and over again how the Father had come, how Jesus said he was going to come in the same way. If you go to my website, DonKPreston.com or BibleProphecy.com, and if you order this book, Like Father, Like Son, and you attach a note, send me a note along with the order that says, hey, Don, I saw your offer for your book, Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory, on Now TV. All right? Make sure to include a note. The book is regularly $19.95 plus $4.95 shipping. But if you send me a note saying you saw the offer on Now TV, guess what? I'll refund your shipping. That'll save you $5. Okay. So be sure to do that, because you'll be able, in the quietness of your own time, you take the book, you take the Bible. You compare the notes between the two and just see if what I'm sharing with you is not the truth. All right? Now then, Jesus said he was going to come in the glory of the Father. As the Father had come. The Son could do nothing of himself, but what he has seen the Father do, he will do likewise. Again, John chapter 5. And so here we have Jesus' emphatic statement that he was going to come as the Father had come. But someone jumps up and says, now, wait a minute, Brother Preston. Jesus said he was going to come on the clouds of heaven. He was going to come out of heaven. Doesn't Acts chapter 1 say he was going to come in like manner? Well, yes, it does. You know what that means? He left on the clouds. He was going to come on the clouds just like the Father had come. See how easy that is? When we understand the imagery of that text, then we understand what Jesus was saying. And oh, by the way, a good friend of mine, Dan Derry from Canada, is in the process right now, as I give this lesson, he is in the process of finalizing a book on Acts chapter 1, 9 to 11, and the promise that Jesus was going to come in like manner. I can tell you right now, I've been reading the initial draft of the book. He's got more to add to it. I'm going to contribute a little bit to it myself, Lord willing, if he likes what I've written. This will be a book you absolutely must have. I can tell you that right now. Okay, so the argument is made that Jesus was going to come on the clouds. He's going to come out of heaven. I have a book in my library. The part of my library is right in there. And in the book, the author, now deceased, the author makes the argument. Well, it's certainly true that in the Old Testament we have predictions of the day of the Lord. And it's certainly true, those are times in which the Father acted in judgment by utilizing this nation against that nation. He said that's absolutely true. But what these preterists, and the names he called preterists are not pretty, they're horrific names, but nonetheless, what these preterists fail to see is that in all of those Old Testament prophecies of the day of the Lord, those prophecies of the day of the Lord that were fulfilled at different times in history, not one time do we have reference to God coming out of heaven or coming down. And that's in contrast, he argued, with the New Testament, in which Jesus was going to come down out of heaven. Now, it's absolutely amazing that he said, well, yes, in the Old Testament, the Father is depicted as riding on the clouds and coming. Well, if he's depicted as riding on the clouds and coming out of heaven, doesn't that mean he was coming down? I mean, he wasn't going up, was he? Okay. I have to tell you, I was literally stunned when I read that comment in that book. That man was a part of the faculty of a school of preaching with a PhD. And yet he said, we don't have any examples in the Old Testament in which God came down in one of those historical days of the Lord. Well, let's take a look at that. In the book of Micah. Now, the book of Micah is roughly contemporary with the book of Isaiah. Okay? And in the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 30 through 37 that we've already examined, remember what God said. He said that if Jerusalem would submit to him in quietness and obedience, he said he would come down. Isaiah chapter 30 and following. He would come down. Okay, again, that was in the days of Hezekiah. Hezekiah ultimately submitted to the Lord, trusted in the Lord. The Lord came down and destroyed the Assyrians. Now watch this in the book of Micah. You know, right after the book of Jonah. It's on, page 814 of my Bible. A little levity there. Okay. So in the book of Micah, contemporary with Isaiah, written during the time of Hezekiah, who was the king in Isaiah chapter 30, when the Lord said he would come down and fight for Jerusalem. Okay? Come down. In the book of Micah, I'm going to begin reading with verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which he saw, please catch the power of this, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. Now, you have to understand, the Assyrians under Sennacherib invaded the land of Israel. They laid waste 46 cities. And they came up and they besieged Jerusalem. Now watch this. Hear all of you peoples, listen, O earth, and all that is in it. Now that's, by the way, a Hebrew parallelism. He is calling the land the people, and he's calling the people the land. Hebrew parallelism. Okay. Let the Lord God be witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. Now watch this. Watch this. This is incredible. For behold, the Lord is coming out of his place. He will come down and tread on the high places of the earth. My goodness gracious. So we have a book written by a man with a doctorate degree, part of the faculty of a seminary, making the unabashed, emphatic claim that nowhere in the Old Testament does it say that the Father, when he would come, although it's admitted that he came, that the Father, when he would come on the clouds, and it's admitted that he came on the clouds, and yet this PhD professor claimed that nowhere in the Bible in the Old Testament, does it ever say that the Father came out of heaven, that the Father came down. And yet, there's Isaiah chapter 30, and chapter 31 as well. And here is Micah that emphatically said God was coming down in the judgment of Samaria and in the judgment of Jerusalem. Now, next week, folks, I'm going to show you where when he came down, heaven and earth were destroyed. I'll see you then.